Welcome everyone to Adasina's Q3 24 investor briefing presented live today, October 3rd, 2024. My name is Danielle Burns. I'm the Managing Director of Growth here at Adasina Capital, and I am your MC for this briefing today. In this briefing, we will share key details about the next phase of our extractive agriculture campaign and selected other impact initiatives, year-to-date performance of our investment portfolio, and Adasina's continued firm growth. A few housekeeping items before we get started. After we have covered the items on this briefing agenda, we will respond to questions that were submitted in advance and during the briefing. Please do utilize the Q&A channel to submit questions during the briefing. For anyone who is not familiar with this channel, you can find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen or wherever your Zoom menu bar is located. Our backstage team will coordinate questions for discussion during the Q&A session. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to address all questions during the briefing. Rest assured, however, we will follow up with responses to any unanswered questions. Please also feel free to engage with our team through the chat channel during this briefing, and do keep an eye out for links that will be shared in real time to provide additional details and resources related to the topics being discussed. For security purposes, we do not allow any links that we haven't pre-screened. Today's speakers include myself, again, Danielle Burns, Managing Director of Growth here at Adasina Social Capital, and I am Adasina's newest team member, overseeing our marketing, relationship management, and sales teams. I am thrilled to just be part of the Adasina family and this beloved community. I've been in the impact investing space and for over 20 years, and I've been a fan and a supporter of the Adasina team and the amazing work that the team and the collective community is doing. So I'm just delighted to be part of this journey. In today's briefing, you'll also hear from my colleagues, Kevin O'Neill-Smith, who's our impact strategist representing our impact team. Kevin will share impact updates around our extractive agriculture investor mobilization campaign and the Hip Hop Caucus and Bank Black and Green. My colleague Maya Phillipson, our Chief Operations Officer, will be stepping in for our originally scheduled speaker, Roberto Thornton. Unfortunately, Roberto is out sick today and is unable to join us. However, we are so grateful to have Maya represent our investments team. Maya will share our Q2 24 and year-to-date 24 portfolio performance and market commentary. First up on our agenda, some exciting firm updates. Both as your MC today and as the newest member of the Adasina team, I am delighted to begin by inviting you to join us in celebrating 4 amazing years of pioneering community-centered social justice investing. As clients, partners, peers, supporters, and campaign participants, you are vital members of our community and participants in our shared success. Together, we've accomplished unprecedented outcomes, including uniquely positioned and replicable global social justice investing products, a portfolio that meets rigorous investment criteria and metrics that's informed by our social justice partners, investor mobilization campaigns, including ending forced arbitration for sexual harassment and ending the sub-minimum wage, attracting signatories representing trillions of US dollars in shareholder assets and resulting in meaningful, measurable, positive outcomes in years, friends, years, not decades or generations. Industry transformation initiatives such as the due diligence or the DD 2.0 commitment and the freedom economy that help create more just and equitable financial systems for all. We believe we have shown we provide what impact investors want their investments to do: catalyze positive impacts in years, not decades or lifetimes, and deliver non-extractive market-like financial returns. We are so grateful to you for joining us in doing that work together. Which brings us to the latest Adasina milestone. Our ETF has surpassed 200 million in assets under advisement. The continued growth of our ETF corresponds to our growing investor confidence in aligning portfolios with social justice values. Thanks to your confidence in our strategy, we are now positioned to dramatically scale up our impact and industry transformation capacity. This is a critical moment for us to expand our presence and influence in the market. as intensifying anti-DEI and anti-ESG attacks combine with the increasingly severe effects of climate change to make our work even more important and urgent. Recognizing both the opportunity and the urgency of this moment, in Q3, our leadership team launched a comprehensive strategic initiative to expand our team's capacity and equip our small yet mighty team to be even more effective at delivering meaningful, positive outcomes that advance racial, gender, economic, and climate justice at the scale of financial markets. That includes recruiting me to join the Adasina team as Managing Director for Growth, recalibrating our team's functions and responsibilities for greater resiliency, and several other initiatives that will unfold during the remainder of 2024 and throughout 2025. You'll be hearing much more over the next few quarters. A few call to actions before we dive into the agenda. Together, that's you and Adasina, we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Now is the time to invest for social justice and community. Please consider what it will take for you to maximize your allocations to social justice investing and contact our team at invest@adasina.com to discuss how we can help you follow through on that allocation. Please also consider how you can maximize your support for our social justice partners to sustain and expand their work in advancing racial, gender, economic, and climate justice, and contact our team via impact@adasina.com to discuss how we can assist. And last but not least, please do let us know how else we can work even more closely together to advance social justice in finance. That brings us to the next item on our agenda, key impact updates. Kevin O'Neill-Smith is here to share a significant update on our Extractive Agriculture Investor Mobilization Campaign and participation in the Hip Hop Caucus and Bank Black and Green campaign. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Chief Danielle. Llifguhas ac sanihas ac arhas ac ishas chaltakat we yachaini yashkanda et sikhat dosak connectedi yuchat dosak yesh yitzati daklowedi dachtakan jilkakwan. Hi everybody, my name is Kevin O'Neill-Smith, and as Danielle eloquently stated earlier, I'm Adasina Social Capital's impact strategist. Before I dive into extractive agriculture, I think first it would be helpful for me to provide a quick summary of what the purpose and intended outcomes are of an investor mobilization campaign. The purpose of an Adasina investor mobilization campaign is to provide a collective platform for the investments industry to initiate and stimulate systemic change. At Adasina, we believe individual investment has meaningful impact, but large-scale change requires coalition building with other investors. To achieve our goals, we use social justice investment criteria and strategic campaigns to engage companies and financial markets. An outcome of formatting our work around a campaign is that it empowers us to meaningfully engage values-aligned investors and impacted communities through offerings like Adasina's investor toolkits. You might be asking, what the heck is an investor toolkit? And I'm glad that you asked. Investor toolkits are an enhanced set of resources that empower investors to divest or engage with their portfolios and educate their communities and networks on intersectional topics like extractive agriculture. These toolkits primarily consist of three components. One is investor datasets, which describe publicly traded company behaviors developed in partnership with our campaign partners. Two, it's investor statements, which define actionable steps for investors and companies to address systemic inequities. And three, it's thought leadership, which serves to educate investors on relevant social justice issues and available levers of change. Now that we've covered campaigns loosely, let's start to bring extractive agriculture into the fold. Defined as a subset of industrial agriculture, extractive agriculture refers to the dominance of only a few companies that control the global food and feed supply chain through 7 key sectors, which are listed on the slide for you. This topic addresses companies whose business models directly drive biodiversity loss, excessive greenhouse gas emissions, elimination of local farms, abuses of farm workers, the proliferation of toxic and carcinogenic chemicals, topsoil loss, and so much more. As it stands today, our partners tell us that extractive agriculture poses one of the biggest obstacles to climate justice and sustainability. Speaking of our partners, we've worked with 2 partners throughout the span of the extractive agriculture campaign. First is ETC Group, who supported the development and implementation of the social justice investment criteria and metrics that speak to extractive agriculture in Adasina's investment portfolios. ETC Group also released the Adasina-sponsored 2022 Food Barons Report, which serves as the research backbone for this campaign, and finally details the unintended consequences of extractive agriculture on business, climate, and community. Secondly, we've also partnered with Friends of the Earth, who have helped us incredibly in the creation and development of campaign goals, as well as the development of investor and shareholder engagement strategies that help us to continue to align the work that we do with the outcomes that we hope to achieve over the lifespan of this campaign. Now that we've gotten this far, you're probably wondering, out of all of the topics in climate justice, why did you choose extractive agriculture? And there's a number of really good reasons. Agriculture is a major contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions and deforestation. The industry alone uses roughly 75% of global resources to feed roughly 30% of the world's population, clearly indicating incredible inefficiencies within that space. Pesticides used in extractive agriculture spread carcinogenic chemicals that disproportionately impact low-income and communities of color. Jobs in agriculture are listed among the most dangerous and often result in smallhold farmers, a large portion of which are farmers of color, driven off their land entirely. Lastly, the monopolistic practices that characterize extractive agriculture impede on free markets and stifle innovation within the industry. So now that we've covered campaigns from Adasina's perspective, investor toolkits, extractive agriculture and why it matters, our partners, now let's kind of transition to the juicy stuff and talk about the work that we've been doing for the last couple of months. Today, we're proud to announce the live release of the Extractive Agriculture Issue Brief. The purpose of the issue brief is to highlight the harms of extractive agriculture and offer actionable steps for investors to inform, spark conversation, and mobilize collective action around this topic. In the simplest of terms, the issue brief should contain all of the necessary information that you might need to explain why extractive agriculture is a material issue to people, planet, or profits. We're also excited to share the release of the Extractive Agriculture Investor Statement. The investor statement is designed to serve as a platform to collectively demand the end of extractive agriculture practices by a community of global investors. Now, what can you do with all of this information? As you know, at Adasina, we are so committed to taking community-centered action in public markets. So please take action in community with us. I encourage you to download and share the issue brief, educate yourself and your community on the intersectional risks associated with extractive agriculture. I encourage you to sign on to the investor statement and make your values and priorities public. I encourage you to take a moment to familiarize yourself with Adasina's extractive agriculture dataset and leverage the dataset to either divest or engage with companies inside or outside your portfolios. And last but not least, I really encourage you to consider joining Adasina's Extractive Agriculture Investor Coalition by emailing us directly at impact@adasina.com. The coalition is a group of values-aligned investors and our campaign partners that are dedicated to furthering discussions around extractive agriculture throughout our investments industry. In summary, we are gaining momentum with this campaign and with the support of a community dedicated to educating themselves and those around them, dedicated to influencing company behaviors through divestment or engagement powered by community-centered research, dedicated to amplifying work that is important to them. With a community like this, we'll continue to see progress in addressing social and environmental harms that extractive agriculture continue to impose on us all. I'm going to take a quick breather there and gently pivot to our next topic, which is highlights the work that Adasina is doing in the broader social justice ecosystem in partnership with Hip Hop Caucus. In early 2024, Hip Hop Caucus and Adasina connected, and just as quick background, Hip Hop Caucus is an influential advocacy group focused on social justice and political empowerment and operates within the intersection of racial and climate justice. We connected with them over the synergies in our work, and just to provide a little bit of the background of behind the work that they do just alone at Hip Hop Caucus, they are really focused on the supporting and advancing Black banks in America. Black-owned banks have historically been at the epicenter of wealth creation for Black communities in America by providing mortgages, small business lending, and providing access to financial services in communities that predominantly larger white-owned banks have historically overlooked. While we all know that while money, when it stays local and even more so when it stays within minority-owned institutions, there is this type of multiplier effect that is observed. However, in light of the clear economic benefits that Black-owned banks provide, they are experiencing a sharp decline in their numbers from around 50 Black-owned banks in America in 2000 down to around 20 today. This decline is an indicator of our nation's growing racial equity or racial wealth gap and is a key priority of Hip Hop Caucus's advocacy work. With all this in mind, it is clear that investing in Black-owned banks is not only a moral imperative, but also an opportunity to spark incredible amounts of economic growth. The Bank Black and Green campaign is designed to support the remaining Black-owned banks in the country, as well as continue growing that space across the nation. The Bank Black and Green campaign is organized by Hip Hop Caucus in collaboration with the National Bankers Association and the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. The Bank Black and Green campaign is organizing Black-owned banks in the United States through a pledge to commit to investing in public health and safety of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and therefore by doing so, shifting millions of dollars of green lending and capital to communities they serve, which are often first and worst impacted by economic and environmental injustice. In real simple terms, the pledge is for minority-owned deposit institutions, and more specifically for Black-owned banks, to stop funding fossil fuels and mass incarceration. Following the public release of this pledge, a lot of traction and interest has been garnered by larger institutional investors interested in and motivated to making large-scale deposits directly to Black-owned banks that have made this pledge. Conversations with these larger financial institutions have resulted in a better understanding of the barriers that these institutions face when making meaningful deposits to Black-owned banks. And these barriers center primarily around the lack of investor interest, perceived investor interest, and financial viability as a result of required updates to internal infrastructure. Hip Hop Caucus consulted with Adasina to develop an investor letter to really hone in on this investor interest aspect of the campaign and to empower investors to demand that their own financial institutions start making large-scale deposits to Black-owned banks that have made the Bank Black and Green pledge. Investors have the ability to move deposits to the banks that have signed the pledge. A commitment of support to this campaign is a necessary step to show the banks that there is investor interest and financial viability in making their own commitments, upgrading their own infrastructure, and issuing products to investors in the coming years. With all this in mind, we ask that you encourage your own financial institution to sign the letter and share it with anyone else who might be willing to share it with their financial institutions. I want to pause briefly here to say that this work is a clear example of the way that Adasina engages with our broader community in ways that go well beyond what's possible with traditional divestment and corporate or shareholder engagement activities. By supporting one another and collaborating with like-minded, values-aligned investors and organizations, the potential positive impacts that we are able to generate are boundless. Organizations like Hip Hop Caucus, National Bankers Association, African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs, are groups that occupy vastly different spaces than Adasina and are a clear example of why having a Big Tent matters. Individual successes or wins don't really stack up to much when you're trying to address systemic issues, systemic problems. It's togetherness, it's collaboration, it's community, and it's a shared vision for the future that really moves the ball forward and sparks change. As I close out on this topic, I have a few action items for us all. Please, please, please share the letter wherever you can, which is again an express commitment to increase cash deposits at Black-owned banks that have made the Banking Black and Green pledge. Please engage and educate yourself on the Bank Black and Green initiative, a link to which should be dropped in the chat momentarily. And lastly, I encourage you to amplify the work of Hip Hop Caucus and other organizations working in the front lines of racial and climate justice. Share their stories, engage with them directly to better understand how you can play a role in shifting capital to the communities who are most impacted by racial and climate injustice. I think that's it for my section. So Danielle, I will pass the mic back to you.
Thank you so much for that excellent update, Kevin. Last and certainly not least, portfolio updates and commentary. As a social justice impact investor, our work is centered on driving systemic change at the scale of the market by investing in global public equities. Maya Phillipson is here to share key details on Adasina's Q2 and year-to-date portfolio performance, along with brief comments on our perspective on the wider market context. Maya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am going to start talking about Q2 and Q3. I'm going to start with broad market updates, and then I'm going to narrow in on specific performance. Q3 ended 3 days ago, so we are working on analysis there. But I have a lot to say about Q2, which was very, very interesting. Let's start with the broad market around Q2. First of all, the Fed cut rates, and it was a much higher cut than the market was expecting. 50 basis points, half a percentage point, and it came quite late it came on September 18th, which was towards the end of Q3. So in Q2, we didn't get the full effect of that Fed rate cut. And so I'm very interested to see kind of how that data will work itself into Q3, because we also had a much larger amount of volatility than we were expecting. Now, that volatility was in Q2 and it actually carried over into the third quarter as well. And most of that was drawn from the Magnificent Seven. We call them around here the Malevolent Seven. Yes, we think we are hilarious. In usual finance terms, where we shorten everything, we call them the M7. And the M7 drove a lot of that volatility due to market reversal. We saw sort of the same thing again at the very beginning of Q3. There was significant volatility because we saw a lot of investors trading in and out of these M7, these mega cap companies. Now, none of these M7 companies that I'm talking about that are driving a lot of this market volatility are in our portfolio because of the high social justice risks that they carry. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second when I talk about social justice issues and how they interact with the market as a whole. Let's talk about, on our next slide, a little bit of our performance. Excellent. Here we go. So these are numbers as of 8/3/24, because we're in the process of putting together our Q3 analysis. Our Q3 fact sheet will be coming out in the coming weeks, and it will have performance for all of Q3 up to 9/30/24. It should come out right around the end of October. And despite all of the work that I have tried to do, it will not be spooky Halloween themed. I tried, nor will it be scratch and sniff pumpkin spice, whatever. So sad. But for today, I can talk about some returns up until 8/3/24. What you'll see here for the quarter to date, year to date, 1 year, and inception numbers, you'll see our Justice Index, which is what all of our products are based on and track, particularly our ETF product. You will see our Justice Index has a quarter to date return of 7.8, where the GSAC, which is a global all cap index, has a return of 4.5. If we look at volatility, you can see where some of those numbers are coming from. Again, quarter to date, you'll see our Justice Index has much lower volatility than the GSAC, again, having to do with those M7 names. It's not solely due to the M7, but it certainly contributed to the volatility that we're seeing play out in the market. You can see that again as we look at the year-to-date returns. You can see that the Justice Index is lagging slightly the GSAC, and you can see those volatility numbers again playing themselves out in the year-to-date there. All right. Let's talk a little bit about our social justice investment criteria, because I did mention the M7 and I mentioned that they have been producing a lot of volatility in the market. So as you saw on our last screen, you did see that as a year to date, the Justice Index has trailed the broad market equities. Those broad market equities had that heavy concentration in these M7 companies, and we are not invested in those companies. What isn't happening is that during the market reversals, we have mostly driven by the M7, we have slightly outperformed. And when the M7 are doing incredibly well, since we don't hold them, we have slightly underperformed. We don't hold those companies because they're not aligned with our social justice values and they're not aligned with our social justice criteria, which we create and guide all of our impact and investment strategies. We benefit from our large amount of diversification, even without holding those M7 companies, because many of our colleagues are deeply, deeply concentrated in those companies. I encourage you to read a LinkedIn post that was created by our CEO, Rachel Robichauty. It's called Why Adasina Excludes the So-Called Magnificent Seven in Our Social Justice Index. Um, we're going to put a link to that in the chat, and I encourage you to read it. It gives more details about some of the things that I am talking about. What's interesting is that even without these companies, the broad market breadth that we are able to contain within our products has proven its diversification values sustainably over the long term. So we're very proud about the amount of equities that we're able to have within our index. Let's talk about how we screen out SJI, which stands for Social Justice Investment Criteria violations. So our index differs from broad market indexing in that we're deliberately excluding companies that have social justice criteria violations. So we're using exclusionary screen. So let's talk about the first of the M7 companies that comes to mind, which is Amazon, which we all love to hate, myself included. It has several social justice violations, including violations around immigrant detention, citizen and immigrant surveillance, prison involvement, and forced labor and child labor. So one of the things that we see with excluding a company like Amazon and several of the other M7s is that they don't just have one social justice criteria violation, they tend to have quite a few. One of the things that we see is that the bad actors kind of tend to group together, and some of our good actors group together as well, which is one of the ways that we're able to get such a large amount of diversification within our portfolio. Something that Kevin talked about is that our social justice investment criteria, they're informed by our social justice partners, and they're done so in collaboration with our impact department. They're applied to our index and other investment products, and they're strategically made public, which is something that you saw from Kevin, where he shared a data set around extractive agriculture. So through our investment mobilization campaigns, our data sets are strategically made public, and we encourage you to take a look at them, particularly around our now focus on extractive agriculture. We provide tools, again, such as investor statements. We provide toolkits, which Kevin talked about, and this is all part of building our bridge between capital markets and social justice movements, which we apply first to our own portfolio and then encourage all of you to think about how you can be part of these investor campaigns as well. Let's talk about some of the ways that you can do this. You can read our CEO's LinkedIn post on the M7, which talks again about returns and market volatility. You can refresh yourself on the Adasina social justice criteria and how they help us create these uniquely positioned products and actually implement our social justice strategy. And if you have any questions about increasing your allocation to any of our products or want to talk about returns, I encourage you to email invest@adasina.com.
Thank you so much for that excellent overview, Maya. We appreciate it. Thank you all again for joining us today. So as we reflect on our achievements on behalf of everyone here at Adasina, I want to express our deep gratitude to you. I want to affirm our continued commitment to our shared values and continued collaboration. I encourage you to please consider redoubling your participation with us in taking bold, decisive action to transform financial systems for the regenerative economy we all desire. And before we dive into the Q&A section, I also want to briefly reiterate a few key takeaways and actions from the discussion today. We've shared a lot with you over the past half hour or so, so here's a quick recap of some of those highlights. Please do consider download and share the Extractive Agriculture Issue Brief to spread awareness. Share the investor statement and take action within your portfolio. Consider joining the Extractive Agriculture Coalition by emailing impact@adasina.com, and share the Hip Hop Caucus investor letter and support deposits at minority depository institutions. And lastly, please do review our social justice investment criteria and our CEO Rachel Rabashoti's LinkedIn post. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance and during the briefing. We appreciate your interest and your active participation. We're going to try and get through as many questions as we can here and prioritize the questions that reflect queries from multiple people. And again, rest assured, if we don't get to all the questions, we will certainly follow up post the briefing. So the first question, we received several questions about the extractive agriculture campaign. So Kevin, I think these are for you. What are the key data points or measurements for evaluating and categorizing specific companies or practices as extractive?
Is a great question. I'm going to give a very high level answer and then kind of go into the specifics as to why. But the high level answer is it depends. It depends on what the extractive practice is and who is looking at it. To evaluate and categorize specific companies or practices as extractive, Adasina, like we always do, we rely heavily on our partners who are really the experts of these issues and are instrumental in helping us uplift these campaigns off the ground, whether it's through development of an investor data set or an investor statement, or just to bring an issue to our radar. Regardless of the topic of any past or future Adasina campaign, this principle will hold true. The movement decides the criteria and measurements. For example, for extractive agriculture, ETC Group identified corporate concentration as the key metric that indicates whether a company is engaged in harmful or extractive agricultural practices. For comprehensive and updated insights, I encourage you to read and share ETC Group's Food Barons report, which again served as the backbone, research backbone to the extractive agriculture campaign. This report includes key data points and measurements that guide our company evaluations. And the latest report containing all the relevant data and metrics used to assess the extractive agricultural practices should be dropped into the chat right now. In summary, ETC Group and other partners are instrumental in determining the evaluations of companies. We can't figure that out on our own. We have to be in collaboration with community when we try and solve those problems or those unknowns. And decisions are always driven by a wider movement's consensus. And then last but not least, detailed and updated data is available on ETC Group's website, as well as in the Food Barons report. And there's also some extra information on our Adasina Extractive Agriculture Investor data set that you can check out.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Looks like we have one other follow-up question here on the extractive agriculture campaign. Kevin, can you share what does success look like for Adasina's extractive agriculture campaign?
Great question, because ultimately for Adasina, success for extractive agriculture would be a complete transformation of the food system, where food is produced without causing harm to either people or planet. And while I recognize that is a lofty goal, and rightfully so, there are several key milestones that we have our eye on that we believe can signify meaningful progress as we monitor the progress of this campaign. Those milestones include companies halting the most harmful agricultural practices, companies ending the use of the most harmful chemicals in food production, companies ensuring fair treatment and condition for agricultural workers across the globe, companies preventing the displacement of communities due to the agricultural expansion or practices, and lastly, companies ultimately stopping biodiversity loss associated with current agricultural methods. Achieving these goals would represent meaningful steps toward a broader vision of a sustainable, equitable, and harm-free food system. And achieving each of these goals would be a sign of a successful extractive agriculture campaign from Adasina's perspective.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Next up, and unsurprisingly, we've got several questions about how we think about financial return, values alignment, and risk and return. I think this is more poised for Maya. Maya, do you think you can address all of those together? Yeah, how does Adasina think about financial return regarding value alignment and the trade-off between risk and return?
Absolutely, I will try my best. If I don't directly answer your question, I want to remind you that we have an entire investment team that is headed by Rob, who's not here with us today. And so all your specific questions can be sent to invest@adasina.com. I saw one in the chat specifically about ETF returns. We have fact sheets that we can share for you, as well as our ETF website. So I highly encourage you to email invest@adasina.com as I share some high-level overviews on our meeting today. So let's talk about risk and return. When I think about risk and return, and when we think about Adasina's risk and return, we think about sort of two different types of returns. We think about a financial return and we think about a social return. And when my business partner Rachel and I were starting Adasina, we used an analogy in which we talked about risk and return and financial and philanthropic returns being on a spectrum. And that spectrum was crime to philanthropy. And so if you think about philanthropy, it has 100% social return and a 0% financial return. You are literally giving money away. Doesn't get much worse than that from a financial return, but it also doesn't get much better than that from a social return. On our other hand, we have crime. Now, crime has the best financial return possible. You are getting 100% of something by stealing it from someone else. But it also, as we all know, has a 0% social return. Now, when we look at the public market, it's not nearly that easy. But using that, we can start to look at public market companies and their behavior, as Kevin so adequately explained, to sort of put them on that financial and social metric. Because when you have a company, I'm going to call out Exxon, who is a fossil fuel company, they are literally stealing clean air and water from the future. And so you can think about their social return as pretty negative. They also sometimes have a pretty good financial return. And when you think about companies that are socially aligned, doing well, they often have a quite good financial return and a good social return as well. And so by using these exclusionary screens that we develop in our portfolio, we are attempting to receive the highest financial return and the highest social return together. Because we're broadly diversified, which I talked a little bit about when I was speaking about returns, we are aiming to receive market-like returns in our portfolio with really amazing social returns. Danielle, I think I lost the second part of that question. I got very focused on returns, makes me really excited. Can you give me the second part of that question again?
It was just how does Adasina think about the financial return regarding value alignment and if there's a trade-off between that risk and
Great.
return? Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think I spoke a little bit about trade-offs. We don't believe that there is a trade-off. We believe that you can receive market-like financial returns with good social returns. Again, when we're thinking about social returns, we are aiming to invest in companies that are aligned with our social justice values, but have a portfolio that is broadly diversified and receives market-like returns. Um, so we've been quite successful in that. I'm very proud of our investment strategies, but that's generally a framing that we use for return is how can we exclude our bad actors, but still receive market-like returns?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maya. Thank you, Maya and Kevin. This brings us to the end of our Q3 24 investor briefing today. Thank you to all attending this briefing. We certainly appreciate your presence today, whether you're tuning in live or catching this recording later. This wraps up our Q3 24 investor briefing. We look forward to engaging further with you and offering more resources to help you integrate social justice values into your investment strategy, fostering long-term positive impact. If you haven't yet subscribed to our mailing list, we encourage you to do so now. Subscribing ensures that you receive timely updates, including a follow-up email containing a recording of today's briefing, as well as additional materials to aid in your efforts to affect systemic change through your portfolio. Additionally, being on our mailing list guarantees your invitation to our Q4 investor briefing, and we certainly hope to see you there. We welcome your insights and invite you to share any feedback, questions, or suggestions you have with us at events@adasina.com. And we will follow up again on all questions we weren't able to answer or address today during this briefing. But should you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to invest@adasina.com. But most of all, remember, together we can become formidable agents of meaningful change, benefiting both people and our planet. Thank you so much.